name is Ricardo Pau-Llosa. I am a professor at Miami-Dade College and a writer. And it is my pleasure and honor to be here today to introduce two gentlemen who are figures of great prominence culturally in our community. We will be showing a documentary called Aurelio, A Rebel with a Cause, based on the life of Aurelio de la Vega, one of the great composers of our time, who is with us here. And the film was directed and produced by Camilo Vila, who is also with us here today.
Oh, I think that some people will like what I say, some people will hate what I say, some people will love me, some people will want me dead.
This guy can write.
I just loved the sound and the modernity.
Aurelio's sense of perfection reminds me of an article written by Gaston Vaquero, in which he compares Aurelio's approach to his own music to that of a priest officiating Mass in the utmost faith, devotion, and honesty.
Aurelio writes music that is deeply, intrinsically, viscerally human.
It's always particularly elegant, much like Aurelio himself, and it's always about love.
And the way that he played around with the rhythms, even in these new works, written by, I think he was 19 years old, you could hear that the beginning of a genius.
There runs this theme of such exquisite beauty that it almost hurts at certain moments.
Aurelio is not just a fine composer, he's a very, very cultured artist. But Aurelio's music actually sort of grabbed you and shook you.
Aurelio the man is a genuine native son of Republican Cuba.
Even more than being a composer, a musician, Aurelio was Cuban, and that's what's in this music.
I think I know something about Cuban sensuality through Aurelio's music.
It was fascinating to me to find Cuba in his music, but Cuba filtered to an international language.
I think Aurelio's legacy has to include his Cuban heritage. He somehow was able to integrate his heritage and musical history that speaks to everyone.
There were always two names mentioned in relation to Cuban music. One was Julián Orbón, and the other one was Aurelio de la Vega. The two greatest Cuban composers of the 20th century, both of them left Cuba because of how they felt towards the regime.
These are the artists that got slammed with the Cuban Revolution at the high point of their career. And most of them left Cuba and continued their work for decades, evolving outside of Cuba.
Aurelio, first of all, is not your typical artist or composer.
Creativity just flows. He just let it go.
He writes the way people feel.
Intense search of beauty.
A very profound and poetic mind.
There's an honesty about his music.
Ideas emerging from Aurelio's brain.
I was mesmerized.
It was a lot of fun being a Aurelio student.
A real kindred spirit.
I'm going to create such a wonderful piece, that someone in the future, when I am dead, is going to ask, who the hell is this composer, And they will say, well, it was a Cuban composer.
And now we can ask both Aurelio and Camilo some questions that we have about this fascinating topic.
Well, the questions are always dangerous.
Oh, well, that's the whole point of questions, right?
I thought we were in trouble. But
So, Aurelio, you're one of the most prominent figures of what I and others have referred to as the third generation of Cuban modernists, a generation which emerges into maturity in the 50s and continues their work to the present. And we generally think of them as the golden age of Cuban culture. It was the moment in which Cuba broke away from regionalisms and all the different things in architecture and poetry and in art and music, of course, as well. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about, what it meant to be a member of that generation, surrounded by all these different figures and beginning to create your work at a time in which Cuba was becoming a cosmopolitan culture of the 20th century.
Well, I always said, Ricardo, that Cuba in the 50s was in a way, a mystery, because in the middle of many negative things, it emerges as an incredible, the decade of the 50s in Havana was an incredible period. I was living there, I'm witness to it, I'm part of it. And it was fascinating, there was the great boom in the economy, the treasury was floating with gold, and the architecture was fabulous, in many ways. The architecture in Cuba in the 50s was superior to the architecture in the United States, by far, both in realization and in ideas. The theater was incredible. In every corner you had a theater group, The music was fascinating. The Philharmonic of Havana was at that time one of the great orchestras of Latin America. And it was a very, very beautiful time because, it created things, and at the same time it gave you ideas to create, it's a very good period. Now in music, it's an interesting thing. In music, because music is always the last ones in a culture to flourish and to... In music, we still had the remnants of nationalism, And the title of the documentary, Rebel with a Cause, starts there precisely, because I said, no, we have to open the doors to universalism, and to what is happening in the whole globe, and the waving of the flag is very beautiful, but it has a limited, amount of possibilities,
Exactly.
So I started this idea of having a music that was not originalist thing, but a universal thing. And people always ask you, well, why are you Cuban? I say, I don't know why I'm Cuban. I was born there, I suppose. And the idea of my message and my legacy would be, when I die, whatever value this work has will be related to the place I was born. So one will ask, well, who wrote that piece? I say, well, it was a Cuban. Fine, But it doesn't have anything to do with the folk materials or with of the moment. So in that respect, it was an interesting struggle. It was an interesting struggle. There were some few people that follow me in that respect, but it was a minimal thing in relation to the other things that were happening. The painting was flourishing in an incredible way. It was, as you said, the golden age of Cuban painting, and a painting that was free, from a political message, which is the sad part, for example, that I find in Cuban art, with some exceptions, of course, as usual, when you find an art that is related to a pro or a con, and it's this obsession with this political problem that we are dealing with, And I think that's negative and sad. We didn't have that at that time. It was a completely free, open society in that respect, with many ideas,
Right.
And I was part of that, and I was very happy, and I had that remembrance forever,
But wouldn't you say, Aurelio, that what defines a culture, usually those mechanisms come much later. In other words, X years from now, X generations from now, people will look back and will define Cuban not by the folklore or only by folklore, but also by your work and the work of other artists of that period and subsequent periods,
Yes.
which don't have a specific regional flavor, but nonetheless are very Cuban. I think of Los Once, for instance. The paintings of Los Once were influenced by formalism and abstract expressionism, but in many ways we look at their form of abstraction as different, as peculiar, and that's what makes it, Cuban. It's not, palm trees and, and regionalism. So that what is Cuban will eventually be defined by your work, not what is Cuban defines your work.
Exactly, very good, very good.
So, as an art critic, that's what I look for, when I'm studying, painting. I was wondering if you had any specific anecdotes or connections with some of those artists and writers of that period, like Los Once, Los Concretos, or any of the Lezama Lima and Orígenes group, or any of those people.
Well, it's interesting. For example, let's start at the end. The Orígenes group was a fantastic movement. I never met Lezama personally. And it's an interesting thing because, some people say that the type of music that I write or wrote is eventually not directly related to the Lezama idea in literature and poetry. And I recently talked with someone that I say, why don't you write something about that? Because that's a very interesting thing, which is true. Even if we never met personally, there was that relationship.
Virgilio Piñera, did you
exactly, that's the type of thing, Right. And as you said, this idea of Cubanness will come later.
Right.
I always say, look, Beethoven didn't need, in his work to cite, a folk tune from Berlin or from Hanover, no, he was so great that he shaped German music.
Exactly.
And Debussy shaped French music. He didn't quote a tune from Marseille. No, I am Debussy, and that is what I am, And that was always my goal, as you said, to do something that will reflect later, but it would be the other way. It's not this thing reflecting on me, it's me reflecting on that.
Exactly. Camilo, I wanted to ask you, since you've done some brilliant work, documentaries on various Cuban masters, and the relationship between the personality of the artist and their work. How does that play in the way that you, execute these wonderful films?
Well, when you do a documentary, which, by the way, this was my first one. I've done movies and commercials and episodics on TV, and I personally, I rely a lot on the structure. So to me, this was a major, major challenge because you create the structure at the end. And I set out to do this documentary because I knew Aurelio, and to me, Aurelio is bigger than life as a person. I never pretended to do a piece of work about his music because I'm not qualified to do that, or didn't have the resources, or even a biography. What I wanted to show was the man that I knew, because I know like you said, later in life, people are gonna know his work, but they had no clue who Aurelio was. His sense of humor, his wit, his knowledge about everything. He has an opinion about everything. And I wanted to bring that out, so that's there too. That was the only thing I intended.
Isn't it a wonderful paradox of artists that they're probably the only true individuals at any given time in any society, because true artists are rebels with a cause in that sense, right? But at the same time, the art that they produce seeks to transcend personality, but at the same time, they have such unique personalities that we want to know them as well as the work. So that paradox sometimes, well, as all paradoxes are impossible to resolve, but was that playing in your mind as you were putting this together?
Right. Again, if I didn't know Aurelio, but I heard his music, I would never have a clue that he has a great sense of humor, that he's funny, that it's very light to deal with him. It's not a big. I would think the opposite. I would assume wrongly that he is a totally different person than he really is. So that was my only approach. I want people to know who he is, as a person, not just his music,
Aurelio, you've lived outside of Cuba since when,
Well, it's, for good since 1959.
Since 59, okay. How has the reality of Exile impacted you as a composer? We've all gone through this, horrible period of not being able to reconnect with our homeland. But I'm curious how, Exile per se, if it played any role in in the creative process. I think it was Guillermo Garón Infante who said there's no success like Exile. And I was wondering if you could reflect on that reality.
Well, Ricardo, the situation that happened in Cuba, that has happened to many other groups, mainly in the 20th century, has been a very violent century. It's definitely two-sided. On one side is sad, because exile is always sad. You lose something, and even if you think that you recuperate, you never recuperate anymore. It's like a violin string that breaks. You can make a knot, but it doesn't work. In that respect, in the negative side is that when you lose, your country for whatever reasons, and we know how we lost ours, at least for me. You never return in reality. If I would go back to Cuba, which I do not intend for many reasons, I would not connect anymore. It was something that disappeared, and that's it. My experience with that particular land disappears. Now, in the positive thing is that you're going to the world, you have a tremendous amount of perspective for many things. You don't belong to the country that gives you shelter, in this case, United States. I will never belong to the American culture as real, belonging. I am tremendously grateful. It has been a beautiful relationship. So I always say you belong to 20 people that understands you. That's it.
That many.
Yeah. Well, if you're lucky,
right,
if you're lucky, yes. But the thing, of course, is that, for example, from a technical point of view, the fact that I left Cuba was positive, because there were certain elements in the music making that at the time I was there, they were not possible. So I always say I would have left no matter what, returning, to my family and so forth, but not staying because it was not possible. For example, I give you an anecdote. I had a string quartet that, was, there were two string quartets in Havana mainly, the Sociedad de Conciertos and la Música de Cámara. And they were all friends of mine, and they wanted to do the quartet. Well, these people never passed the second movement, simply because they could not play it. Because the technical ability of this particular moment was not possible to what you were writing. So this immediately you come into the broader stage, you realize that you can do it. And you can do many other things. You have orchestras which are incredible. You have people that read your music like this in a moment, You have the electronic world, many other things that were positive in that respect, and that created a tremendous amount of work. The fact remains that I lived in the outside of Cuba more than the inside. I was here in 47 and 48 to study. I was here in 53 and 54 as a lecturer. I was here in 57 to 59 because the universities were closed. I returned to Cuba. I didn't like what I saw. I say, thank you so much. And then I came here. So if I add all the years, I have been more outside than inside.
Course, yes, exactly.
However, you remain definitely a Cuban.
Oh yeah, of course.
As Camilo was saying, in respect to humor, in respect to way of acting in front of things and so forth, no matter how serious your art is, because I don't play maracas and I don't move the hips every morning, this is a different situation.
Can I say something? Because he says about the humor, this is interesting, because I know him. Once I learn about his music and I understand his music, I find a lot of humor in his music.
Of course.
But I would not have found that humor if I didn't know him. I would not, it would have gone over my head. It would have gone over my head, but because I know him, I go, oh,
there it is.
There it is, his humor.
And there's also tremendous sensuality in the music. I mean, we might hear these atonal structures and we might think, oh, this is very intellectual and very abstract, but I find a tremendous, almost like a dance quality.
Yes.
Ricardo, I want to give you a compliment because you asked me, going back to the question you asked me about this, that I answered in terms of structure. I went out to interview a bunch of intelligent people and bright people. You were one of them.
Thank you.
And people like you of many, you started talking, and I was able to start finding the documentary through things that you said and other people, his wife and Marie and him, for example. But I had to find that later. I didn't set out to do that. I found it later.
Well, I think the magic of your documentary, which, by the way, I find it very beautiful, and you know I have said that it moved me greatly, because it presents precisely the whole picture, you know, the man, the music, you know, the culture, the moment, whatever. In the interviewing of all these different characters, which were very bright, including Ricardo, who was the star for me of the documentary.
I agree.
And not only because what he says, because, you know, what he says is the directional thing of the communication between the arts and the periods of all, but the way he says it, you know, I mean, is also very Cuban, you know.
Very
this man is with his cigar telling people, I am Cuban, and I am talking about another Cuban, you know. And I think this is magnificent. But, you know, the thing of the documentary that is very beautiful is that it covers all these angles, and I think you have done, in reality, for me, a masterpiece in that. I mean, it's like a puzzle, you know. You had all these pieces, and you were able to put them together and create a very wonderful image.
Did you know my grandmother?
She talked to me the other day on the phone.
Right. I think she told you to say that.
I wanted to touch on a central issue, which I think every culture, every artist as an individual, I think artists are like the seed of a culture, and that is the relationship between pleasure and order. I think
that's a great thing.
I think that if you look at, if you want to find out what really makes, what identifies an artist's style or the spirit of an artist's work, whatever the art form, whatever the period, and how that later influences and shapes a culture, it is that paradox of pleasure and order. You know, I'd like to hear how that plays in your mind as you're composing.
Well, you know, the question is very interesting because, you know, you don't know if pleasure in a mind that is more or less organized produces later the structure, or the structure produces the pleasure. You know, good. I think it's both things. I think it's one of those paradoxes in which both ways. In my particular respect, I think it is the structure that produces my pleasure. It means, I think that all great art, as you know, Ricardo, in all its forms, I think the basic thing is the form, the structure. People don't realize it. People think it is the atmospheric thing, the outside, the sensuousness, you know. No, I think it's the structure. There is nothing that is eternal that doesn't have a structure, you know, from the pyramids to today, you know. There is always this mechanism, you know. I always say, why is that we hear a string quartet of Beethoven 200 years later, and it's amazing? It's still amazing. I said, still amazing because it has a fantastic structure, you know, which is the difference between that and a dance tune. You know, the dance tune is limited to this, it's repetitive, you know, it's 32,000 times the same theme, you know, and the same volume, and the same block, and at the end, what happens? Nothing happens. In 5 years, you forget that, you know. So it is the structure that when you finish something and you contemplate it, if you are not completely crazy, that some artists are too crazy, you can criticize it yourself. You know, you look at it and say, well, this is not so bad, you know, or this was not right, you know. I have to come back to it or something. And this, you know, once you shave the whole thing, and once you say, this is finished, you know, it gives you a tremendous pleasure. It's a fantastic pleasure. It's almost almost as kissing a woman or smoking a cigar or something, you know. I mean, it is very fantastically,
Even
it's
more.
it's an object that is there, and you're happy and you're proud of it. Then you forget it and you go to the next one. But obviously, for me, structure creates pleasure.
Camilo, would you like to?
Well, I never saw, first time I hear that concept, I have to think about it, but I do know that in film, which is, by the way, I find that film is the first cousin of music. When I hear filmmakers talk about paintings, I go, what does painting has nothing to do with film? Because movies are just like a symphony. It's a structure.
Yeah, there's a time
it's
element.
The tension,
it's
the this.
Right.
And to me, rhythm is what's very, very close to structure. Something has no structure, has no rhythm. Not beat. I'm separating beat from rhythm. Rhythm, you need structure for something to have a rhythm. Otherwise, that's when people say, "Oh, the movie got very boring in the middle," because it lost the structure. It lost the structure, and so to me, structure. What I've always thought about it was in terms of rhythm. And like I said, that starts in the script, but in a documentary, especially a documentary like this, there is no script.
Well, the interesting thing about the documentary is that precisely because of the structure and because of the sequence of elements in the structure, it hits you.
Yeah, but I had to create that at the end.
Yeah, because you are the creator of that. You know, like I wrote the music, you wrote the documentary, you know. But it has a very tremendous structure, and that's what hits the people.
Well, I found the script in the documentary. You guys wrote the documentary. I just found it and put it together. And it was hard, to be honest. It was hard. Aurelio and Anne-Marie, who came along the whole trip, the whole journey, they know how hard it was to find that documentary. Because at the beginning, you have this big, huge scene of 2.5 hours that you say, okay, how am I going to make this work?
To pursue a little bit this whole idea of order and structure, obviously, what you were mentioning, you know, that in more and less complex music, it's very repetitive. So there's no element of surprise. But in elevated composition, in refined, in music for its own sake, there is that element of the unpredictable that is part of that structure.
Absolutely.
And so how does that, are you often, you must be often startled by when your piece is you're composing, you think it's going to go this way, and then, it's going to go this other way, right? How do you incorporate it? Do you resist that? Do you go with it? Do you follow it? Do you let it happen?
It depends, Ricardo, on what you think the value of the surprise is.
Okay.
You know, it could be that the element that it takes is not good, you know, and it doesn't fit or whatever. Or it could be that it's a fantastic, you know, discovery, shall we say. The thing that always, I think, keeps a work alive forever is a mystery. It's always that mystery that goes beyond the reasoning, that appears. I mean, if you believe in God, it's a God-given thing. If you don't, it's a chemical thing. I don't know what it is. But there is always a mystery in the creator when you arrive at certain levels of creativity that is unexpected. You yourself are surprised. Exactly. You know, some people ask me, how did you write the string quartet, for example, of 1957? I say, I don't have any idea by now. You know, this came and it happened and it was very good and I am very happy.
You probably didn't have an idea at that moment either,
you know,
right?
But it's always that mystery, and that is what makes it interesting and probably great. Look at your poetry. When you look at your poetry, you look at it and the first reading, you know, or the first hearing, which is what people don't remember, that poetry used to be read all the time, aloud, really, you know. You don't read it, you hear it, you know. When you hear it the first time, sometimes you're startled. You say, wait a minute, where do I going? I mean, and suddenly you make a second reading and you discover, you know, that this went here and this went there. And then this came as a mystery, you know, and this part was a surprise and it's fantastic. And then you read it 10 times and it remains with you forever. Right. That's what makes a great poetry alive too, you know.
I always think that a work of art has an enigma that cannot be exhausted, but I find this a very hard concept to explain to some of my creative writing students because, or in fact, many other artists, often that mystery that you talk about is confused for obscurity. And in a lot of contemporary film and art and literature, the obscure is what takes the place of enigma or mystery. And a mystery or an enigma is very clear. It's just inexhaustible. It cannot be narrowed down. Whereas obscurity is like a riddle that you don't want to know the answer to, you know, because there's a lot of riddles in contemporary art and music and poetry and so forth. And I personally find that very annoying. Riddles are, I didn't even like them as a child.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I think what happens too is, you know, in this idea of the new world with the mass concept, you know, the masses are the ones that are right, you know, this kind of thing, you know, we're not going to go into that, you know, which produces tremendous results, as you know.
Yes.
But, you know, the thing is that in this populist idea of the present, there are all kinds of clowns around, you know, that are elevated to the category of geniuses.
Yes.
You know, the guy that spits at the floor and they put a frame and this is a great piece of art, you know. It's amazing. It's a strange time in which the value of the piece is substituted by the caricature of the piece or by the mask of the piece, you know.
Or the assumed content or message which
exactly.
obscures the enigma.
Yes. I think also, especially the academic world has gone, in terms of art, it's been more about express yourself and overlooking the genius and the craft of what has been done. No, you express yourself. And like you said, if you speed, well, this is how I express myself. Let me speed on and put a frame. And we have overlooked, and I think the academic world is a lot to blame for that. We have overlooked the masters, the craftsmanship. Aurelio said something very interesting I found it very interesting because it definitely applies to writing a script. In the documentary, he says, writing music is 20% inspiration, 80% hard work. And Picasso said something that's similar. He said, inspiration exists, but it comes when you're working. While you're working is that
Exactly.
Well, I think that you know, this is part of the thing, as Ricardo was saying, that the magic has been substituted by the obscure. That's very good because that's exactly what the thing is all about. Because the obscure, you know, gives you the chance to do anything you want, you know, in many ways, and cover all your holes, you know, and your idiocies, you know. Because in reality, you know, for example, when you are in academia, you know, whatever, and people tell you, oh, I study with Stockhausen or with this or with the other one. I say, that doesn't mean anything. If you did not have the seed, you know, no one is going to give it to you. You don't buy it in the pharmacy, you know, your talent is not, you know, in a corner, you know, so forth. No, you come with it, and it's a mystery too. Why do you come with it, you know? And you put water in the instruction, and then it flourishes. But if there is no seed that is germinal, forget about the water, you know?
In terms of self-expression, I always think of that wonderful observation of Suzanne Langer, the philosopher, who said, we're not interested in what the artist expresses, it's what we're interested in is in what the artist can reflect on feeling. You know, because anybody can express themselves. A perfect stranger, a baby crying is expressing himself, and that's not necessarily or at all art. And so it's really, how does that reflection help me understand that feeling or that state of mind or that idea? And what are the repercussions, both cognitive and emotional, of that reflection?
That's right.
And that's where the mystery comes from. And that's what your music so brilliantly does over and over again.
Well, the problem is that the baby crying is a statement today, you know. It could be, you know, this is a tremendous
because
piece,
we love
you know?
content.
Yes.
We love content replaces, and we even value artists by their affiliation or their statement, their position on an issue. And so if you take the right positions, you're a great artist, no matter even if what you're doing is nonsense as art, because you have the right position on this issue or this other issue.
That's correct.
And I'm sure this happens to you and to you, Camilo, as well, that, you know, people, I'll go to a conference and people ask me, what do you think about this or that? It has nothing to do with what I've just read or presented, but they want to know first what I think about these other issues before they can value my art. And I go, this is ridiculous. I mean, anyway, it's just a very peculiar world we live in, and I think you hit it right on the head. It has a lot to do with mass communication.
yes,
The presence of communication has reduced art to simply another vehicle of
That's right.
communication, rather than a vehicle for entertaining mystery on an eternal level in the here and now.
Now,
Well-
I ask you a question. Are you happy with the documentary?
I'm a very strange person, and I'm being sincere about this. I am so happy that you're happy.
Yes.
Because that's really. I read when I was in film school an interview to Antonioni, and they asked him, "What's your favorite movie that you've done? Your favorite movie?" He says, "The next one." I enjoy so much the process, and to me that's it. The process. Once it's finished, I don't even know I did that documentary. It's gone. It's really emotionally detached.
Well, no
Now,
matter. You did it, and we thank you for it.
and I'm very happy that you're happy, and that makes me incredibly happy. But at this point, it's gone. It's done. It belongs to whoever wants
To the world.
to the world.
To the 20 people that understand you.
And you know, it's also very difficult to do an artistic documentary on an artist, because
Yes.
the world of the artist and of the artist's work presents an enormous challenge, because it's not like doing a documentary on, I don't know, butterflies or you know, and, beautiful and intriguing as they are, but they have a life cycle, they have a presence in the world. But the presence of the imagination has its own agenda and has its own narrative. And somehow the documentary, the film has to capture that. Not just simply talk about it, but capture that and present it in a way that isn't just simply explicative or expository, but is also creative in its own way. So that for me is like the ultimate.
There's a documentary, you probably know it, that when I was at film school, in film school I saw for the first time The Mystery of Picasso by, it's this, Mario, who's sitting back there, probably knows the name of the director, I forgot. He did also Wages of Fear. He took Picasso, it impressed me so much, talking about an artist doing a documentary about an artist. He took a canvas and he will shoot from the other side, and Picasso will paint, and then he will talk about what he just did. And that documentary left me like, to me that's the epitome of, I mean, the masterpiece and of doing a documentary about an artist. So I hope I did something close to that.
Yeah. Well, the other day, I have received many comments about it, and some of the comments come from intelligent people, because people who are not intelligent are not going to write me about it,
Right.
So the ones that have written about it and have said something intelligent, one of them the other day said something about the opening of the documentary when we are playing the epigram, but you don't show the pianist.
Yeah.
You remember? And the person said, this is a very wonderful moment in which the person that is doing the documentary, this gentleman called Camilo Vila, understands that the music is the subject, and not the image at that moment, and that the message comes through the beauty of the sound and not through the beauty of the image. That was a very interesting thing.
Absolutely.
I remember when you and Maria was driving and you were in the speakerphone in my car, you and Maria called me that you had seen the final product, and you called me to thank me and to say how happy you were. And that moment, that was my Oscar. I won the Oscar right there. After that, it was over. It was over for me.
No, it won't be over. I will keep reminding you that it's good.
I know, but that day that you two called me so excited and you said that, it's so good, blah, blah, blah. That was it. That was like winning the Oscar. I thank you. And
Well, the interesting part of this documentary is that we have 3 people here, and we are alive, and we are talking about something which is still alive, and that's very good,
Yes,
it's not a
it's true.
documentary
It's
about,
true.
Goethe, and so forth.
Yeah.
It's something that is here.
We're
it's
here
alive,
now.
It's
We're here
changing.
now.
Ricardo is throwing magnificent ideas, and then you toss it back and so forth, and I think that's wonderful. It's a good play. And it's our vengeance. We are still alive, you know. That's a great vengeance.
We'll
All
always
the
be
enemies
alive.
are very, very unhappy, you know.
Well, I hope that you always be alive now because there is your work, there is this documentary and your work.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you for this wonderful conversation. And, of course, Aurelio, for your brilliant work. A lifetime committed to beauty and ideas in a time that, in all times it's difficult, but in this one as well.
Yes, yes.
And Camilo, thank you for the
you.
brilliant work that you've done on this film and for allowing us into the world, the magical world of Aurelio de la Vega and his music. And I want to thank you for being with us today, and I hope you have enjoyed this moment with these two fine artists. Thank you.